Hello and welcome back to another episode of Your Drone Questions Answered. I'm John Dicko with the Drone Launch Academy, here to find the answers to your drone questions. Now, today's question is what factors to consider when you're pricing out your drone services? And in the past, we've talked about things like doing some free work for a little while, doing some cheap work for a little while building up your experience. But Cody, founder and CEO of DroneAdair, he's here to actually offer a different perspective on things. He actually made a really good post on his LinkedIn the other week that covers this topic. He offers 3 very important things to consider, and also he introduces some things that you can actually tangibly do moving forward to make things a little better. But Cody, thanks again for being here with me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You were on last year. Quickly, I want you to just kind of introduce yourself, tell us a little about yourself, and also what DroneAdair is all about.
So I founded a company called Midwest Aerial Productions about 8 years ago. And that really just started off very local services, trying to figure out what worked and what didn't in the drone industry, back then, and trying to understand in my market and where I wanted to be with drones. I started in the agricultural space before that, even back in college. That's kind of how I get introduced to. I knew I didn't really want to go down that route because I felt that it was a very tough industry to penetrate at that time. And by doing that, just getting out there, trying pretty much everything. It's the opposite of what I tell people these days of niching down is just kind of casting a wide net, and it turned into more of a brokerage model, right, of a company where we would find the right pilot for a client's specific needs and allowed pilots to hopefully work with them and not just throw it to the wolves and see who clicks accept first or submits the lowest bid, right? So was able to scale that, scale the pilot network, and kind of realize that a lot of common problems in the industry of just pilots not wanting to be able to sell all the time or be in the way to try to get into these enterprise clients because it's a tough sales cycle, right? In a lot of different ways, or you really have to get out there. So we developed DroneAdair about 3 years ago now. Pilot platform is really a sales funnel, booking page, collect payments, manage all of your information, files, client data, client portal, all that. But when we release our enterprise here coming up soon, is it really allows then these drone pilots to get hooked up with these enterprise clients and giving them a way to create some recurring revenue stream. So it's a SaaS platform with a really a cool marketplace component in the middle.
Very cool. And it just also speaks to how plugged in you are to this industry, which correlates very well with this topic today of coming up with your pricing structure for your drone services. Let's kind of get into this question of factors to consider, and maybe even starting off a little bit about what are the dangers of some ways that beginner pilots price their services.
Yeah, I think immediately you have to kind of look at where you're at, right? Location wise, because I'm in Wisconsin. What I can charge versus something that someone can charge for doing the same exact services in California or Texas or New York might be completely different, right? And you mentioned it before as well as obviously there's a ton of factors that play into this with experience and type of equipment. And there's so many ways to kind of look at it. I've always been pretty transparent as I don't have one necessarily way to do something. And I think that's just the way you have to be in this world and the industry is like be adaptable and try to figure out kind of all of the factors at play. And that just starts by, I think, asking enough questions. Like when you have a job that comes up, is getting down to pretty much everything that could happen or they need, right? So that you don't get surprises at the end of the day. And it's just like, hey, someone reaches out and says, I just need a drone video. It's like, okay, do you want photos as well? Do you want this edited? Do we want higher elevation, lower elevation, time of day? Where are we going to be at? Is there any airspace restriction? Right? It's like getting down to everything that you can think of that might be entailed with this job is kind of that first step before I'll even think about throwing out a price to someone and being very knowledgeable on what exactly would make them happy at the end of the day, once the project's completed, what does a successful job look like to the client?
Yeah.
And then once you kind of figure that out, then you got to kind of start looking at how are we going to price this out? Is this a hourly type of a job or is this a per project type of a job? And I think then you can really start to look at this makes sense for that client or we got to go a different route. I think the dangers, like you mentioned, is probably not asking enough questions up front before giving someone a price. That's like the main thing I would say.
I appreciate that. And just even looking at the post that you did on LinkedIn, and you had kind of mentioned in your post that things like free work or super cheap work, how could that kind of negatively affect the market and do a disservice for you in the long
Yeah, I mean, I don't get me wrong. I've said it many of times that if you're just starting out, it's totally fine to do free work. And it's totally fine to just get practice and experience. I would never say, hey, never do free work, right? But I would say there is a time and a place where you have to just kind of graduate from that and not necessarily just give out your services to get a client or to continuously, once you have that experience, kind of got to set that precedence of like, okay, no, this is where I'm at, right? Where I have the experience, we have the knowledge, and just put it out there. But I think it is important in the beginning. You're not gonna be able to charge two, three, $400 or more an hour if you just are starting out, right? You have to get to that level, quality wise, experience wise, and not maybe not even necessarily experience. I know some people that pick up a controller for the first time and they are awesome, right? Like they're great pilots, they know exactly what they're doing, but it doesn't just come down to that, right? It comes down, can you edit it? Can you, give someone the proper deliverables that they're looking for? How to analyze the data if you're doing a map or if you're creating a 3D model or something where the client, they may know what they're looking for, but if they don't, can you show them where that value is, right? So I just think there's a time and a place for everyone to do free work and to do cheaper work. My post regarding that topic was more so along the lines of a lot of these other companies out there, these brokered modeled marketplace drone network companies out there. There's a handful of great ones out there. They pay you a great rate. They are still giving pilots what they deserve, but there's a lot of them that don't, right? We all know those ones, and I think if you go into any Facebook group, you will see some of them being posted in there. So I think the biggest thing is just knowing where you're at and also when to be okay with just saying no to a job that is just ridiculously low.
Thank you for the clarity too on that comment on doing free work and kind of reinforcing that that is necessary. And especially for the very beginning of your career, doing stuff like that. Kind of just going back to factors to keep in mind when pricing things. One thing you also mentioned in your post is just putting pilots first. And so things like being educated, but your client about fair market prices. Can you speak to that at all?
I see this more and more now is like even when I was doing a lot more brokered work, there was a lot more communication on that end of back and forth. You would get plenty of clients that would be like, hey, we got this in the budget and we have to educate clients is like, hey, well, it's really not where we would be at for the quality level that you're looking for, the type of product that you're looking for, the timing. But I think not only just the
Mhm.
price education, people that are maybe newer to the drone industry from a client perspective may not know all that goes into it. Right? Like we have airspace. We
Mhm.
have to look at airspace. We got to either get authorizations or we might need a waiver or we have to have type of insurance potentially for a job like this or knowing what they can and can't do because some of them want you to do some crazy stuff that may not be in the scope of work or it might not be safe or you might not even be able to do it. And I think it's just being able to let them know it's like, hey, in order to get a job done like this, these are all the factors at play and educating not only yourself on all those factors, but then also your client, kind of setting that precedence of what that would cost and the time and effort that it would take as well. A big thing too is just knowing what makes you happy, right? Like what would a job for you as a drone pilot, what are you good with? Like going out and doing. And if you could say, hey, at the end of the day, I made $500 today. I flew for a couple hours and I had maybe an hour or two of editing, and that's what is a good rate for you. And you can say, hey, I do that every day. It's a pretty good day. Or if you can string together a bunch of locations, right, or a bunch of shoots in a day, where I think creatively scheduling shoots as well, if that's
Mhm.
possible in some ways, where you can group them together in the same locations or ones that are on the way from each other. That is a big factor as well. If you have 15 locations versus one location, we could give you a little bit of a discount on that or a pretty good deal rather than just saying, hey, it's a one-off job. Not sure if we'll ever work together again or not. Maybe, right? You hope you would, but it's where you kind of got to play that factor into it as well.
Yeah, and this all kind of goes back to what you're saying sort of in the beginning of the conversation is that everybody's situation is different. Clients' needs are different, your location's different, meaning your market's different. There's so many factors you need to keep in mind here. And so it's asking those questions and knowing according to your particular situation what those questions need to be. And it's not going to be the same for everybody.
Yep. And looking at it from, if you're doing this part-time versus full-time, a ton of weekend warrior pilots that are making an awesome side income that's almost replacing their full-time income in some ways. It's because they're knowing that this is a side job, but I can really plan out my time and know when I can and can't do something, but also that they're telling their clients and telling whoever else they're getting this work from, ultimately, this is when I can do it. This is how much I'm going to do it for. And they have that already established in their mind is like, all right, if this is an hourly job or is this a daily rate job, I think that's a big factor at play. Or is it just a project based, like, hey, it's a package type mission, pretty standard stuff. You need this done. I can get it done whenever. And then you go from there. No matter what, if it's not a daily rate, like if someone, for example, I was shooting a campaign launch video last week for someone that is running for a political seat. That's a production. So it was an Inspire 2 daily rate, right? So those rates I have already standardized, right? So it's a full, hey, you get 8 to 10 hours worth of coverage. I'll be on site for 8 to 10 hours, right? And you get the Inspire 2. It's a one operator versus two operators. Do we need a VO? And then you can kind of add on from there too. I have a production trailer that we can add on and things like that. But having those already in place versus, all right, I'm going to go shoot one home or I'm going to go shoot a construction project, right? So knowing that and then being able to look at it as like, from my point of view, is if it's not a daily rate or it's a package type job, I'm always looking at just how many hours is it going to take from start to finish, from driving to the moment that I send all the client the footage and it is hopefully done at that point, or baking in the amount of revisions into a job. And then kind of after that, setting that expectations. It's like, all right, 3 revisions, 2 revisions included, whatever it is. After that, we have an hourly rate of editing for anything else that's needed. You know, obviously if there's a revision where it's like we spelled something wrong or whatever on our end, won't include that as a revision. But then kind of looking at it is like, all right, what's my hourly rate? What do I want to have as an hourly rate? I think standard is pretty all over the place, but I think in the drone industry that I've seen is like $100 to $500 an hour and upwards, and for some people. So I think looking at that and then factoring in like, all right, what kind of timetable does this also need to have?
Makes sense, and I can only imagine it takes experience to really understand kind of what you're looking for in terms of how you're gonna price it out or how much time something's gonna take or really what's all gonna be involved that you can use as variables in your pricing. You've been giving advice this entire episode, but kind of one more little slice of advice for somebody who is doing this for the first time, somebody who wants to start making money shooting with their drone and is just coming up with this pricing. What would you tell that person?
I would say start by asking those questions to yourself. What would you be happy with by going to shoot a drone job for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours? And are you adding in time for editing or what kind of processing time or what kind of product are you delivering first, obviously, right? You got to kind of know that in the beginning. But then knowing if it makes you happy that you did it for this amount and you feel good about that, I think that's a great place to start. But on the flip side of that, I will say by not also undercutting not only yourself, but everyone else that might be around you. Because I
Mhm.
think that is something that I've seen probably too often where maybe a pilot will just completely undercut someone else because they know that they're in that job with them, or they know that they're getting other quotes or providing feedback to the client of like, well, yeah, you're asking other pilots. Okay, well, I can do it for this time, you know, and it's like
Mhm.
setting that precedent of I'm gonna do cheap work. Well, if you do cheap work, you're gonna get a cheap product most of the time. I think it's being happy with yourself of the rate, but then also not trying to undercut the rest of the market that is around you is a big thing.
Yeah, I think that's really kind of the takeaway of this entire conversation I feel like we're having is that there's so many variables, so many things to keep in mind, but it's okay to take your time in figuring things out and playing around with different price structures. Like you said, it's okay to start off and do some cheap work or do some free work. But the idea is that you're going to get better and be able to charge more. And in order to charge more, you need to have that confidence in the work that you're actually doing that you can charge more.
I would say too, just as one little wrap up there too, is a lot of times clients will either want like exclusive rights or you can't use that content for your own marketing, right? Well, I've seen it too often where pilots are like, oh, it's fine. That's no big deal. Charge extra for that, right? If they want exclusive rights, you're losing out on that content for you to be able to use it as a piece of marketing or to show off other clients. It's like, hey, I was chasing down this car, awesome shot over a bridge, and I did tracking and this and that. I can't use that footage to show anybody and I'm just telling someone that, right? It's like, well, now I'm going to charge the client more for that exclusive rights because you're losing out on potentially more money just by being able to use that piece of content for your own marketing purposes. So don't be afraid to charge more if they want exclusive as well. I always think that's a great idea.
I'm glad you said that. And we actually recently did an episode about exclusive rights to video, licensing videos. And so you did a little reinforcement there for us. Charge more. You have the right to. You can. So that's great. Well, Cody, I
Absolutely.
really appreciate you coming back on here, sharing your experience here in the industry, giving us a little bit of a different perspective, but also still a very encouraging conversation that somebody can get to the point where they can charge the amount of money they want to charge for their drone services, not undercut the market. Cody Retlich, he's the founder and CEO of DroneAdair. You can check out droneadair.com for more information on Cody and that company. In the meantime, if you have questions about drones that you would like to submit, please send them our way. You can send them over at ydqa.io, or if you're a part of the Drone Launch Connect community, please type it in there. Just like we saw Cody's post getting circulated around the community, and we will see your question. We will find the person to answer it. If you're not a part of the Drone Launch Connect community, it's easy to become a part of it. Go to dronelaunchacademy.com. There's a little tab up at the top, Drone Launch Connect. You can click on that and register through there. It's a cool community, a lot of great ideas, a lot of mentoring being done on this community. We're all helping each other out. So please join. In the meantime, we'll see you in the sky.